Hello, I'm Lisa Burkhart Worley, and welcome to Pop Talk, the show where you never know what topics might pop up. If you are a woman, maybe you've wondered about the issues that men struggle with. Perhaps you have a man who's struggling with something and you need some help. Maybe you're a man and you still need to overcome an issue. Well, today we're going to be speaking with a counselor who has written a book about those issues, and it's called Come On Man. We're going to introduce him in just a minute, but before we do that, I want to introduce our Pop Talk team. To my far right, Dr. Lynette Sim.
Hello.
And next to her is Rosemary LeGrand.
Hello, everyone.
So great to see you guys. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who has actually been on the show before. He is our first repeat visitor to Pop Talk, and we've come a long way, haven't we?
We have. Absolutely.
Chris Robinson is a professional counselor. He is the founder and owner of Summit Counseling of North Texas. He's a speaker, trainer, and now guess what? He is the author of a new book. That's why we've got him coming back, called Come On Man, Taking on the Challenges Faced by Men. Now, as a counselor, Chris works with individuals and couples who deal with either personal or relational issues, ranging from daily difficulties, we have a lot of those, I think, in marriage, to mental disorders. Chris made a career change to counseling in 2010 after spending 35 years as an executive in the construction business. He is a longtime friend who's married to another friend, Denise. He's been married to her for 40 years, and he has 2 adult daughters and 2 grandchildren. So first of all, Chris, I just want to say congratulations on the book. I've read it cover to cover. It is excellent, well written. I was reading at the beach. It's a little, got some watermarks on it, but it is really good. I couldn't put it down. And you deal with a lot of issues in the book. You deal with life balance, control, addictions, communication, fear and identity, transitions, leadership, forgiveness, spirituality. So I want to start with just the easiest of questions. Why did you write it?
Well, the reason I wrote it is because when I was in the transition process of going from construction into counseling, I was asking a lot of professors and a lot of professionals about counseling for men, because that's really where I felt led. And they said that is absolutely critical in this field. Unfortunately, not a lot of people are focusing on men because men don't come to counseling. So I thought, okay, as I sat down and I started thinking about my practice, what are the issues that men deal with, and how might I be able to reach men or make it more comfortable for them to either seek help or explore themselves more so that they could recognize what it is that they're struggling with. And I wrote down on a lined sheet of paper just all the issues that I could think of, and those issues became the chapters to this book. And so that's why you mentioned so many issues in there. It's because there's a broad spectrum of things that we deal with that just don't get addressed.
Yeah, I want to say also that I think women should read this book, actually. Yeah, because I think there are a lot of issues in here that women can relate to as well. I just want to add that little nugget.
Yeah, we just respond differently.
Do you know, Chris, as Lisa said, you cover a number of topics in this book. And one is the early ones of dealing with life balance. You know, you said that, or you feel that it's a struggle for men, but I think women suffer from that type of balance as well. What are some of the ways to achieve balance?
Rosemary, I think that the first thing that we have to do to achieve balance is to know our values. And that's why I start out with exploring values and then lead into life balance. Because if we haven't done a deep dive, and I'm not talking about just the standard response of what's most important to you, I mean really digging into it and doing a lot of self-evaluation, a lot of self-exploration as to where your values truly lie, and finding your passion, and then prioritizing it, right? Because if you have not prioritized your values, then it gets back into the old scriptural verse of you can't serve more than one master, right? Something has got to give. So if I've decided that both my family and my work are equal in value, that's not true. Something is going to suffer, right? I can't just equally attend to work and family. And so I think that we've really got to focus on life balance, and that life balance has got to be based on our values.
You know, what I love about your book is the transparency in here. I think that any gentleman who reads this is really going to be able to capture what it is you're trying to say. It's so clear. But you're also very transparent about yourself. And I think it was in chapter titled Control that you actually revealed that you struggled with pornography. Can you talk about how you overcame that yourself? And then maybe just a couple of insights as to how anyone listening might be able to conquer that type of addiction?
Yeah, the first thing is to acknowledge it, and the second thing is to remove shame from it. Right? Because addiction puts its talons in us, and it hangs on to us, and it wants us to stay in the darkness. It wants us to keep secrets, and the longer that goes on, the deeper the talons go into us, right? And so in acknowledging it, there's freedom. And what happened in my case is that I had a friend who came along and really kind of forced the issue with me in a situation that I go into in the book that caused me to have to talk to, number one, my wife about it. And I was very fearful about how that was going to turn out. And she was extremely gracious and extremely forgiving. And that empowered me to say, okay, there's nothing to be afraid of anymore, right? Now I can go ahead and I can move forward and I can start writing about it. But I wasn't done with fear yet, because for the book to be published, I also needed to let my daughters know about this.
Yeah, I know.
And that was a whole different level
Yeah.
of fear and disappointment that I was afraid of going through. And both of my daughters were equally gracious and said they were actually, proud of me for doing this. So I think that having support around you and being really well connected, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection, because we cannot do this alone. If we're trying to overcome addictions on our own, it's not going to work. We have to have people who can hold us accountable, who can support us, who can encourage us, and that's been true of my story.
So just find somebody, right? Find somebody you can talk to.
Find somebody to come in and talk to. The men who come into me who are dealing with porn addictions or sexual addictions, the first thing that I'm going to try to do is get them with a group, right? Whether it be a church group or a addiction group, Alcoholics Anonymous or Sex Addicts Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, whatever that addiction might be, they need to have a group that they can go in, talk to, acknowledge their problem, and recognize that they're not alone.
Right.
That is the greatest thing of addiction, and in particular with men, because we try to handle things on our own because that's what we've been taught to do. That's what society and culture tells us. And so if we've got a problem, we're going to handle it our way. That's not going to work with addiction.
Yeah. Well, communication can be a real problem in marriages at times. My husband, my husband Jeff, and somebody said, I can't believe there are two type A's married to each other. It's just like so surprising. And we have no problem, each of us, talking. He's on the phone all day, I'm on the phone, whatever. But sometimes our problem is with each other, talking to each other. We so worn out.
Or maybe talking at each other.
Talking at each other. Sometimes I'll be asking him a question. I think he's listening, but he's taking a call. Like he starts talking. I think he's talking to me, but he's actually picked up a call and he's talking to someone else. So that has been a little bit of an issue with us. But you talk about how men and women can become better communicators and better listeners, don't you, in the book? Can you give us some tips on that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned listening, because when we think about communication, we're always thinking in terms of the message that we want to communicate to somebody else. If we're talking about business development or marketing, it's always, what are we going to expound, right? What information are we going to give? And I think that that's the shortfall in communication, in particular in relationships, is that we've not learned to listen well. And so one of the areas that I really focus on in the book, with the little scene with Boudreaux and Winona, kind of having a little bit of fun with this communication deal, is learning to listen, and learning to listen for understanding. Because we do listen, but we listen to respond, right? Or we might listen to blame, or to defend, or we might listen, men are really good at this, listening to fix, right? I know what you need to do. Why haven't you done this? Have you tried this? And so
So you've met my husband, right?
I think he's met mine too.
I've looked in the mirror. I've looked in the mirror. And so when we recognize that we have got to rethink how we listen, we have to train to do that. We have to practice doing that. And I think by that simple act of learning to listen better, we can actually improve our communication 100%. If I want to understand you, we can have issues that we disagree on strongly, right? But if I understand you and I show you the respect of listening to you, then we're going to communicate at a much better level.
I can solve this problem. There's 5 words that a man just needs to say to his wife. You may be right, dear.
Notice how she says
exactly right.
maybe, though.
That's exactly right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Or my father-in-law says yes, dear. He shortened it.
Oh, that's too funny. You know, Chris, one of the other subjects that you deal with is fear. And I thought men, you know, I didn't think men really struggle with fear. I thought it was something to do with women, you know. But how would you minister, or how would you counsel a couple, you know, that's really walking in fear?
Fear is something that I think women do a much better job of talking about. Their feelings, their emotions, with other women. They do much better at being in community than men. Men are trained not to show emotions, not to show feelings, and we develop a fear out of doing that. And so we don't show our fear, right? But we have fear of everything that women have fear of. We have fear of vulnerability. We have body image. We have fear of loss. We have fear of rejection. We have fear of being insignificant. These are all things that are very important to the male ego and to how we identify ourselves. And to have rejection occur in any areas it's a deeper wound to the male than I think anybody really recognizes. And the male won't reveal that wound, but it is through meeting with men that I have come to discover how deep that wound really does go. And I think that what we have to do when I'm working with couples and we talk about communication, this is a piece of it, is how to express your fears and be safe in doing so, right? And recognize that you're not going to be thrown aside, you're not going to be rejected, and your marriage will probably improve really the more open and transparent you are about the fears that you deal with.
Well, talking about men, they were originally, designed to be like these hunters, trappers, bring home the bacon kind of individuals. Mm-hmm. But in today's society, that's really different. So, the breadwinner, usually the husband, a good day is, bringing home the paycheck. But we often have issues with, understanding what is success. I mean, is it the dollar amount on their check? Is it the corporate climb that they're doing? So how would you address an individual who's dealing with what is healthy success?
So I think it goes, Lynette, back to the exploration of values to begin with, right? And the reason I say that is because when we have prioritized our values, then it gives us direction in setting our goals. And I think that when we look at setting goals and achieving goals related to what is most important to us in life, that's how we begin to define success. So I think in those parameters, I'd say that we've got commonality in the way success can be defined, but individually, my priority might be position in the company. My priority might be family. It might be earnings. It might be material, right? It might be having the biggest house. So depending, if we really are honest with ourselves on how we define our values, that's how we're going to define whether we're being successful or not. Now, success and contentment are two different things, right? Because if I have established that my number one value is having the biggest toys, which a lot of guys really value that, I'm not going to be able to find a big enough toy that's going to allow me to see myself as successful, because I'll never have enough. I'll never be content. And so I think that when we look at success, we not only have to align it with values, but we have to align it with contentment and inner peace.
Well, don't we also have to look at fear? Because a lot of success that men are driven to get to is out of fear. Fear of where they came from. My husband came from a very poor background, and so success to him was to have a sofa. They didn't even have a sofa. They moved around. They were in the oil fields. They moved around so much. So at first it was, I had 3 sofas in my house. I'm like, really? We need another sofa? Well, of course we need another sofa. So fear and where he wanted to get was definitely a driving force of what he needed for success.
Right.
But I think now that, he has achieved all of that, what is success in that next step? I think is
right. And that fear of failure is one of the things that I do touch on in that chapter.
Yes.
On fear, because we receive a message, from the time as men that we're little boys, as to what the expectations are in terms of sports performance or academics or socialization or relationships, right? And we start to define what it is that we have to do. And if we're not measuring up to what people around us expect, and we receive disappointment, from our fathers in particular, or our mothers, our fathers, because a lot of us are trying to model ourselves after them. We want to be like them, but we feel like we never measure up if we feel like we're always disappointing. And so I think that fear of failure is ingrained from a very young age with a lot of us in determining whether we'll ever see ourselves as successful. And that goes back to the identity piece of this as well.
And you do talk a lot about different fears in here, and I know I guess, when I give my testimony, it's called Facing Your Fears. And so I think I've dealt with fear a lot in my life, just fear of, maybe fear of failure. But I remember I wrote down, because you said, if you had a do-over, how would you change the effect of fear on your life? What is necessary on your part to get a do-over starting today? And I talked to you about this before we started the show, but I remember when I had plummeted from the top of my career to the bottom. I was working for HBO Sports, a show called Inside the NFL. At that time it was on HBO, and I lost the job after 3 years doing it. And I remember the executive producer saying, we weren't looking to replace you, Lisa, but so-and-so, who was more famous than me, wanted to do it. And he said, let's have lunch sometime. Well, guess what? Lisa did not have lunch with him because why? I was afraid he'd say no if I called him, if I asked for a lunch date, or I was afraid of failing again because I had been so hurt. So do you see that, is it like with women, do men, because of their fear of failure perhaps, not take that next step because they're afraid of rejection? Do men fear rejection?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, we fear rejection tremendously. Rejection will paralyze a lot of men to not try anything again, to not experience something again because of the pain involved in it. It's that deep wound that I talked about. So yeah, rejection can have a huge impact. But what we just have to recognize is that the messages that we receive externally are not who we are designed to be, right? They don't determine who we are. We can choose how to respond to every situation that comes across our path. And we can choose to freeze, we can choose to withdraw, we can choose to go into the closet if that's what we want to do, but that's not going to be healthy, that's not going to result in fulfillment for us. And so, yeah, I think that that's where the connection comes into play, where you can have other people who say, hey, you're going to be okay. Let's try this. If you had had somebody alongside you to say, Lisa, you need to make that call, things could have been different, right?
I didn't know that many people up there.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad that she didn't make
Yes.
that
Yeah,
call. She
yeah.
may not be here with us.
Exactly.
Right. Well, it's all part of the plan.
Yeah.
But, here you are, and here you are talking about it and sharing that experience so that others can grow from
Yeah,
it.
it's one of those big regrets. And you just said something very important. You said it's still part of the plan. It was part of the plan. And you were a man of faith. And we haven't talked much about it in this show, but I see your faith kind of subtly laced through this book. Can you talk a little bit about that and how important it was to perhaps sprinkle your belief, your Christian faith throughout this book?
Yeah, and I wrote the book very intentionally not being heavy on Christianity because I want to reach every man that can be reached. The spirituality chapter is the last chapter, and it's the last chapter for a reason. Because if I started with that, there would be many men who would pick this book up, open it up with spirituality, and say, I'm done. My brother being one of those. And my brother told me when he read the book how much it meant to him and how much he appreciated me not opening with spirituality.
Wow.
And how much he appreciated me including spirituality. So I try to be very sensitive to meeting men where they are.
Right.
And simply sharing my own story and letting that be used how it's going to be used. Letting that impact them, how it's going to impact them, without having an agenda of forcing something down anybody's throat.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that you're a man of faith. Throughout the book, I see it. Of course, I know you, and I know you're a man of faith. So it's great that you do sprinkle that in here, and I think people will know where you're coming from. And I think it's important that when people seek counseling, especially if you're a believer, a Christian believer, that you should seek out a Christian counselor like yourself, because you're going to come at things maybe from a little bit different perspective. Now, we didn't talk about emotion yet, and you do focus on emotion in the book. And I've only seen my husband, I don't know about you guys, but I've only seen my husband cry 2 times. And how many times?
Probably once or twice.
Yeah, what about
Yeah,
you?
about once or twice.
I know that your husband, you've told your story about how he cried
Wait,
on his,
before he died.
right before he died.
Yeah.
And thanking her with his eyes for leading him
Yeah,
to the Lord,
leading
I
him
think.
to the Lord,
And
yes.
so my husband cried when his mom died, and then there was another time which I won't get into, but is showing emotion a struggle for men, or did God just create men to not show emotion?
Oh, I don't think the latter is the case at all. I think we are created as emotional beings. That is part of relationship. That is part of relationship, as you explained it, horizontally and vertically. I think there's emotion involved with people in our relationship with God. And I think that the message, again, going back to what society and culture tell men, is that you've got to be strong, you can't show weakness, no vulnerability. Crying is seen as weakness. And I think the sooner we can dispense with that lie, the better off we are, because it's not how we're created to be, right? The last time I cried was this morning with a guy.
Wow.
as I was telling him a story about another man in my life who made a big difference in how I relate to people. And that's an emotional thing for me. And I think that we have to not be afraid of showing emotion, of welling up a little bit when there are things that truthfully impact us and affect us. There's no shame in showing emotion. I have men come into my counseling office who will break down and cry because they've not done that before, and the first thing they'll do is apologize to me.
I love it when men cry.
And I tell them, look, there is nothing to apologize for. You are safe here. You let it all out. You do whatever you need to do. Never apologize for what you have to say, for what you feel, for how you emote. This is all part of it. And this is moving beyond the struggle to freedom.
Well, I love how you talk about your counseling and you allow your clients to have emotions and not stifle them. I find it, women the same, they tear up and they're like, sorry for wasting your time. It's like, that's what the time is for.
Right.
So I really appreciate that. And we
I
really
even had one woman bring me in a new box of Kleenex. She said, I feel like I've used so much.
I tell my clients, have your Kleenex, and they're like, well, I didn't think I would be doing this. And it's like, let's just assume you're going to hit all emotions, so be prepared. So we can't thank you enough for joining us for the second time on Pop Talk. This is going to be such great information for both men and women. Definitely one of those things that women should read to kind of understand their man, and more so for men to kind of see that they're not alone in all of their emotions and all of these chapters that you have. If you want to purchase Chris's book, you can find it at comeonmanbook.com. But if you want to reach him directly, you can go to summitcounseling.info.
Yes, we love the book. It's a very helpful book, and I hope you order it right away. And we'd love for you to reach out to us here at Pearls of Promise Ministries. You can email us at info@pearlsofpromiseministries.com. We're on Facebook. We're also on Twitter at Pop Talk Media, and also on Instagram at Pop Ministries. Our website is pearlsofpromiseministries.com.
Thanks so much to many of our television network, Faith Unveiled Network, Paula White's Live Network for Women, King Television Network, Overcomers TV, CTF TV, and Channel 49 out of Fort Worth.
Pretty soon we're going to have to just do a scroll of all those TV networks. We're so grateful for all of them. And we're also grateful for Grace Point Media. They did the production on today's show. For all your media needs, go to gracepoint.media. So that is Pop Talk for today. We're just ordinary girls
Who God is turning into pearls.
Have a great week, everyone.